There is a sound that the Earth makes every single second of every single day. It is a constant, low-frequency hum generated by the oceans, the atmosphere, and the shifting tectonic plates beneath our feet. It is called the microseism. It is the heartbeat of our planet. And for 70 years, since we first started listening with global seismic networks, that heartbeat has never stopped. Not once. Until 3 years ago. On a Tuesday in November, at exactly 04:15 UTC, a specific frequency within that heartbeat didn't just fade. It didn't taper off. It simply vanished. For 12 minutes, sensors in Tokyo, London, and the deepest monitoring stations in Antarctica recorded a hole in the world's soundscape. A perfect, mathematical silence where a vibration used to be. Then, just as quickly, it returned. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a sensor error. And according to the physicists who are quietly struggling to model it, it wasn't natural. This is the story of the global silent zone. And the reason you haven't heard about it is that no one knows what or who is hitting the mute button on the world. We live in a noisy universe. If you look at the data, really look at it, you realize that true silence is a myth. Even in the deepest vacuum of space, there are fluctuations, radiations, and waves. Here on Earth, we are drowning in noise. Every wave crashing on a beach sends a tremor through the crust. Every storm front creates a pressure wave that travels for thousands of miles. Even the magnetic field humming above our heads creates a measurable signal. Science relies on this noise. We use it to map the interior of the planet. We use it to predict earthquakes. We use it to monitor nuclear tests. The Global Seismographic Network, or GSN, is a collection of over 150 stations scattered across every continent. They are the ears of the scientific community. They listen to the ground 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And they are incredibly sensitive. A GSN station in California can hear the tides changing in Brazil. It can hear a nuclear test in North Korea. It can hear the ice cracking in Greenland. The data they produce is messy. It looks like a chaotic scribble of lines, a constant jagged readout of a planet that never sits still. But hidden inside that chaos is a pattern, a baseline. It's known as the hum of the Earth. It sits roughly between 2 and 7 millihertz. It's always there. It's the background static of existence. So, imagine the panic when a researcher at the Albuquerque Seismological Laboratory looked at the live feed and saw a straight line. Not a flat line for the whole system. That would mean the power went out. Just one specific narrow band of frequency. Gone. It was as if someone had reached into a complex musical chord and plucked out a single note, silencing it perfectly across the entire orchestra. And not just in Albuquerque. When he pulled the data from the station in the South Pole, the note was missing there too. He checked the station in the Ural Mountains of Russia. Missing. He checked the deep ocean sensors off the coast of Japan. Missing. For 12 agonizing minutes, the Earth stopped singing that one specific note. This phenomenon has a name among the few academics who track it. They call it a null event. And the most terrifying part? It's happening more often. In 2021, it happened twice. In 2023, it happened 5 times. And in the last 6 months, the silence has started to last longer. What we are dealing with isn't just a curiosity. It is a fundamental breakdown in our understanding of planetary physics. Because according to the laws of geophysics, a global synchronization like this is impossible. Sound waves take time to travel. If a massive event happens in the Pacific, it takes minutes or hours to reach Europe. But the silent zone doesn't travel. It arrives everywhere at the exact same instant. That implies a mechanism that wraps around the entire globe. Something that can dampen the Earth's natural resonance on a planetary scale. Is it atmospheric? Is it a shift in the magnetic field? Or is it something else? To understand the mystery, We have to look away from the headlines and dive into the raw, boring, public access data that most people ignore. We have to look at the dark data, the logs that are archived and forgotten, the anomalies that are dismissed as instrument error because they don't fit the model. When you start connecting those errors, a pattern emerges. A pattern that looks less like geology and more like a signal. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand why this silence is so wrong, you have to understand what the Earth usually sounds like. Most people think of the ground as solid rock, unmoving. But to a seismologist, the ground is like a drumskin. It is constantly vibrating. If a truck drives past your house, the ground vibrates. If a tree falls in the forest, the ground vibrates. But the biggest source of this vibration is the ocean. Enormous waves, driven by storms, slam into the continental shelves day and night. The energy of that water hitting the land transfers into the crust, creating a constant rhythmic hum. This is called the oceanic microseism. It is so powerful that it travels through the entire planet. If you put a seismometer in the middle of the Sahara Desert, thousands of miles from the sea, you will still see the waves of the Atlantic Ocean vibrating the sand beneath your feet. This signal is consistent. It rises in the winter when storms are stronger, and it falls in the summer. But it never, ever stops. It is the baseline of our reality. So, let's look at the data from November 14th, the day of the first major anomaly. The GSN sensors were tracking the usual background noise. There was a large storm system in the North Pacific, so the microseism levels were high. The readouts were jagged and active. Then, at 04:15 UTC, something strange happened to the graph. Usually, when a signal drops, it looks like a fade-out. Think of a radio station losing reception. The sound gets fuzzy, then quiet, then gone. That's how nature works. Energy dissipates. But look at this graph. The drop is a cliff. 1 second, the energy is at full capacity. The next millisecond, literally the next data point, it is at absolute zero. This defies the laws of inertia. Imagine a freight train moving at full speed. It cannot stop instantly. Even if you slam on the brakes, the momentum carries it forward. The Earth's crust has mass. It has momentum. It is vibrating with the energy of 1 billion tons of ocean water. For that vibration to stop instantly, you would need a force equal and opposite to the ocean itself to cancel it out. You would need active noise cancellation on a planetary scale. You know how noise-canceling headphones work? They listen to the noise outside, create a sound wave that is the exact opposite, and play it into your ear. The two waves collide and destroy each other, leaving silence. Physics says you can do this in a pair of headphones. Physics says you cannot do this to the planet Earth. The energy required to instantly cancel out the global microseism would be astronomical. It would require a power source greater than all the nuclear weapons on Earth combined, triggered with nanosecond precision. And yet, the data is right here. I pulled the raw CSV files from the IRIS Data Management Center. That's the public repository for seismic data. Anyone can download this. I filtered for the frequency band of 0.2 to 0.5 Hertz. This is the secondary microseism band. On November 14th, across 20 different stations, the value drops to literally zero, not near zero. Mathematical zero for 12 minutes. And then, just as impossibly, it snaps back to full volume. There is no ramp up. The train starts moving at full speed instantly. When I first saw this, I assumed the data was corrupted. I assumed the GSN server had crashed. But then I checked the metadata. The sensors were still recording. They were still online. They were recording other frequencies perfectly. High-frequency local traffic? Recorded perfectly. Low-frequency tidal shifts? Recorded perfectly. Only the UA2 to 0.5 Hz band was erased. It was surgical. This creates a terrifying implication. If this was a natural event, like a massive atmospheric pressure change, it would affect all frequencies. You can't have a storm that only silences one specific musical note. Nature is messy. Nature is broadband. A phenomenon that targets a specific frequency range with a hard start and stop time? That isn't nature. That is technology. But whose? And more importantly, why? To answer that, we have to look at what usually happens at that frequency. Because it turns out, the Earth isn't the only thing that uses that specific band of sound. Submarines use it, whales use it, and, according to a declassified report from the 1970s, it is the exact frequency used by a project that was supposed to have been shut down 50 years ago. The report I mentioned? It's called Project Sanguine. If you search for it now, you'll find the official story. In the late 1960s, the US Navy had a problem. They had nuclear submarines lurking deep in the ocean, effectively invisible. But there was a catch. To send a message to a sub deep underwater, you can't use normal radio waves. Water blocks them. To communicate, the sub had to surface or at least float an antenna near the top. That made them vulnerable. It made them targets. So, the Navy proposed a solution: extremely low frequency, or ELF, waves. These are massive, lumbering radio waves. They are thousands of miles long. They can punch through water, rock, and even the core of the planet. But to generate a wave that big, you need an antenna the size of a state. Project Sanguine proposed turning 40% of the state of Wisconsin into a giant transmitter. They wanted to bury thousands of miles of cable in the bedrock to turn the Earth's crust into a loudspeaker. The public outcry was massive. The project was officially scaled back, renamed, and eventually, supposedly, shut down in 2004. But here is the detail that keeps me up at night. The operational frequency of Project Sanguine, the specific sweet spot they found for penetrating the global crust, it sits right on the edge of the 0.2 to 0.5 Hertz band. The exact same band that went silent on November 14th. Now, I am not saying the US Navy turned on a giant switch in Wisconsin and silenced the world. That's too simple. And frankly, the physics don't work. Turning on a transmitter makes noise. It doesn't create silence. But it proves one thing: that frequency band is weaponizable. It proves that governments have spent billions of dollars studying how to manipulate that specific slice of the spectrum. And if you look at the logs from the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, CTBTO, things get even stranger. The CTBTO runs a separate network of sensors called hydroacoustic stations. These are underwater microphones anchored to the bottom of the ocean. They are designed to hear nuclear explosions, but they hear everything else too: whales, earthquakes, collapsing ice shelves. I managed to pull the public hydrophone data from station HAZO4, located off the coast of the Crozet Islands in the southern Indian Ocean. This is one of the most remote places on Earth. No shipping lanes, no military bases, just open, angry ocean. On November 14th at 04:15 UTC, the hydrophones didn't just go silent. They recorded a negative pressure event. Let me explain what that means. Sound is a pressure wave. It pushes and pulls. When you record silence, the pressure stays neutral. The line is flat. But at station HA04, the pressure didn't stay neutral. It dropped. The water pressure actually decreased slightly in a rhythmic pattern, perfectly synchronized with the silence in the seismic data. It wasn't that the sound stopped. It was that something sucked the energy out of the water. It was an active dampening field. Imagine you are standing in a crowded room. Suddenly, everyone stops talking. That is silence. Now imagine you are in that same room, and suddenly you feel the air being pulled out of your lungs, and the sound of your own heartbeat is muffled. That is what happened in the Indian Ocean. This suggests that the global silent zone isn't a passive glitch. It is an active effect. It is a shadow zone. In acoustics, a shadow zone is a place where sound waves refuse to travel. It happens naturally in the ocean sometimes, where temperature layers bend the sound so it curves upward, leaving a shadow underneath where a submarine can hide. But a natural shadow zone is local. It's a few miles wide. What we saw on November 14th was a planetary shadow zone. Something bent the sound waves of the entire Earth away from the surface. And if sound wasn't traveling through the crust, where did it go? Energy cannot be created or destroyed. That is the first law of thermodynamics. If the energy of the oceanic microcosm didn't vibrate the crust, it had to go somewhere else. It had to be diverted. And I think I found where it went. While the seismologists were scratching their heads at the silence, another group of scientists was panicking about something else entirely: the magnetosphere. The Earth acts like a giant magnet. This magnetic field protects us from solar radiation. It is usually pretty stable, but there is a network called Intermagnet. It's a global consortium of magnetic observatories. They share their data in real time to warn power grids about solar storms. I cross-referenced the timestamp, November 14, 0415 UTC. At the exact second the sound died, the magnetic field screamed, but not everywhere. This is the key. The seismic silence was global. It was everywhere at once. The magnetic anomaly, it was localized. It appeared in only 3 specific locations. 1. A station in northern Canada near the magnetic North Pole. 2. A station in Siberia. 3. And a station in the South Atlantic Anomaly, a weak spot in the Earth's field off the coast of Brazil. In these 3 spots, the magnetic readings spiked off the charts. It looked like a solar flare had hit them directly. But there was no solar flare that day. The sun was quiet. So, let's put the pieces together. We have a massive amount of mechanical energy, sound vibration, vanishing from the Earth's crust. And at the same moment, we have a massive spike of electromagnetic energy appearing at the Earth's magnetic poles and the South Atlantic weak point. This looks like transduction. Transduction is when you convert one form of energy into another. A microphone is a transducer. It turns sound waves into electricity. The data suggests that for 12 minutes, the Earth itself became a transducer. The mechanical vibration of the crust was somehow converted into electromagnetic energy and vented out through the poles. It sounds like science fiction. In fact, it sounds like the plot of a bad disaster movie. But the numbers align perfectly. I calculated the estimated energy loss from the seismic silence. It's roughly 100 trillion joules. Then I looked at the magnetic spike intensity. If you integrate the area under that curve, it's roughly 100 trillion joules. The math balances. The Earth didn't go silent. The Earth was harvested. Someone, or something, took the kinetic energy of our planet's rotation and vibration and siphoned it off into the magnetic field. But why? Why would you need that much power? And why only for 12 minutes? This is where the rabbit hole goes deep. Because while I was looking at the magnetic data in the South Atlantic, that weak spot off Brazil, I noticed something else in the logs, something that shouldn't be there. Usually, these data packets contain raw numbers, magnetic intensity vectors, XYZ coordinates. But in the metadata of the Brazilian station log, right in the middle of the glitch, there was a string of errors. Buffer overflow, time sync error. And then, a repeating pattern of values. 0001, 001. It looked like binary code. But nature doesn't write in binary, and neither do magnetic storms. I ran that string of values through a simple frequency analysis, thinking maybe it was just digital noise from the sensor crashing. It wasn't noise, it was a carrier signal. A carrier signal is what you use to transmit data. It's the hum before the broadcast starts. The silence wasn't just a lack of sound, the silence was a carrier wave. The entire planet, the crust, the oceans, the bedrock, was momentarily turned into a quiet, stable platform. The background noise was stripped away. Why do you strip away background noise? So you can hear a whisper. Someone wasn't trying to silence the Earth to hide something. They were silencing the Earth so they could listen to something that was trying to communicate from deep, deep underground. And at 4 hours, 20 minutes UTC, 5 minutes into the silence, a sensor in the Atacama Desert picked up the response. The Atacama Desert in Chile is one of the quietest places on Earth. It is dry, desolate, and far from civilization. It is the perfect place to hide a listening post. There is a seismometer there, buried in an abandoned mine shaft. It's not part of the main GSN network. It's run by a university in Santiago for local tectonic research. Because it's not part of the main network, the data isn't scrubbed or standardized in the same way. It's raw. On November 14th, while the rest of the world flatlined, the Atacama sensor didn't go to zero. It went wild. While the rest of the planet was held in that artificial stillness, the ground beneath the Atacama started vibrating at a frequency that has never been recorded in geology. It wasn't the Oceanicum Nero 2 Hertz. It was a pure, sharp tone at 16 Hertz. That is, right on the edge of human hearing. If you had been standing there, you wouldn't have heard it with your ears. You would have felt it in your stomach. A sense of dread. This 16 Hertz signal pulsed exactly 3 times. Pulse. 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 And then the global silence broke. The ocean noise came rushing back. The magnetic spikes vanished. The world went back to normal. But those 3 pulses, they didn't come from the crust. They didn't come from a mine collapse. Triangulation of the P waves suggests they originated from a depth of 600 kilometers. That is the transition zone, the boundary between the upper and lower mantle. That is a place where solid rock turns into plastic flow under immense pressure. It is a place where nothing, absolutely nothing, should be able to generate a rhythmic, structured signal. We just found the source of the silence, and it wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from inside. Let's talk about 16 Hertz. In the world of acoustics, 16 Hertz is a dangerous number. It sits right at the threshold of human hearing, in a range known as infrasound. You usually can't hear it, but your body reacts to it. In controlled experiments, people exposed to 16 Hertz frequencies report extreme anxiety, sorrow, cold shivers, and a feeling of being watched. It vibrates the fluid in your eyes, causing hallucinations. It resonates with your skull. It is often called the ghost frequency. And this is the frequency that was blasting out of the Earth's mantle while the rest of the world was silent. But the horror of the Atacama anomaly isn't the frequency itself. It's where it came from. Geology follows strict rules. We know that earthquakes, the cracking of rock, can create sound. But earthquakes are messy. They create a broad spectrum of noise. A crash. A rumble. They do not create a pure, monotonous sine wave at exactly 16 cycles per second. And they certainly don't do it at a depth of 600 kilometers. We need to understand the environment down there. At 600 kilometers deep, we are at the bottom of the transition zone. The pressure is around 24 gigapascals. That is 240,000 times the atmospheric pressure. The temperature is roughly 1,600 degrees Celsius, almost 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Rock doesn't break down there. It flows. It creates diamonds. It creates exotic minerals like ringwoodite. It is a hellscape of crushing molten density. For a structured signal to originate from that depth implies something impossible, a structure, something solid enough to vibrate, something organized enough to keep a rhythm. If you hit a bell with a hammer, it rings. It creates a pure tone because the bell is a single, solid object designed to resonate. If you hit a pile of mud with a hammer, it goes thud. The Earth's mantle is supposed to be the pile of mud. But on November 14th, at 600 kilometers deep, it rang like a bell. I took the Atacama waveform data and I ran it through a spectrogram. This visualizes the sound. Usually, mantle data looks like a smear of red and orange. This looked like a barcode, 3 distinct pulses, each one lasting exactly 4.2 seconds, separated by exactly 2.0 seconds of silence. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Hum. Nature loves patterns, but nature hates integers. Nature doesn't count to exactly 4.2. This brings us to a terrifying question. If the global silence on the surface was the result of the Earth being muted, was it muted so that this signal could be heard? Think of a doctor trying to listen to your heart. The first thing they do is close the door. They turn off the TV. They ask you to stop talking. They create a silent zone so they can hear the faint rhythm inside the chest cavity. Someone or something muted the crust of the Earth to listen to the mantle, and the mantle answered. I am not the first person to notice that something is wrong in the transition zone. While researching the Atacama anomaly, I stumbled upon a thread in a geophysics forum. A few PhD students were discussing deep focus earthquake anomalies. One of them referenced a paper published in Geophysical Research Letters in early 2019. The title was mundane: Anomalous Phase Velocity in the 660 kilometers Discontinuity Beneath the Andes. The authors were a team of Japanese and Chilean seismologists. In the abstract, they claimed to have found repeating, non-volcanic tremor events originating from the deep mantle. They weren't describing magma moving, they were describing heartbeat, a rhythmic pulsing that happened every few months, always from the same coordinate. I tried to find the full paper. The link was dead. I checked the journal's archives. It was listed as retracted. The reason given? Calibration errors in the sensor array. That is the scientific equivalent of the dog ate my homework. It's a catch-all excuse used to bury data that doesn't fit the model. But I managed to find a cached copy of the supplementary data on a university server that hadn't been scrubbed yet. And there it was. The 2019 data showed a signal at 15.8 Hertz. The November 14th data showed a signal at 16.0 Hertz. The frequency is rising. Whatever is down there, whatever is pulsing, it is speeding up. The paper also mentioned something else that the authors couldn't explain. They noted that the signals seem to respond to solar tides. The gravity of the sun and moon pulls on the Earth. We see this in the ocean tides. But it also stretches the solid rock of the planet by about 30 centimeters every day. The paper noted that the heartbeat from the mantle was perfectly synchronized with the peak of this gravitational stretch. It activates when the Earth is under maximum tension. This changes the theory completely. If this was a machine or a base or some sci-fi bunker, it wouldn't care about the moon. But if it's a geological mechanism, a natural trigger that we don't understand, then we are in trouble. Because the November 14th event didn't happen during a tidal peak. It happened during a tidal lull. That means the signal has broken free of its cycle. It is no longer waiting for the gravity of the moon to wake it up. It is waking up on its own. Let's go back to the global silence. If we assume the deep Earth signal is the source, then the silence must be the reaction. Physics has a concept called resonance disaster. You've seen the video of the opera singer breaking a wine glass. She sings a note that matches the natural frequency of the glass. The glass vibrates in sympathy. The energy builds and builds until the structure can't handle it, and it shatters. The Earth is a glass. It is a sphere of rock with a specific resonant frequency. If the signal from the mantle, this 16 Hertz pulse, were to amplify, if it were to get loud enough, it could start to resonate with the crust. It could trigger earthquakes, not just one or two. Global earthquakes. It could liquefy soil. It could ring the planet until it cracks. So, maybe the silence wasn't an act of espionage. Maybe it was a safety valve. Think about the timing. 4 hours, 15 minutes, UTC. The Atacama signal begins to pulse. It is loud. It is dangerous. At the exact same second, the surface of the Earth goes silent. The oceanic microseism is canceled out. The energy is vented into the magnetic field, the spike we saw in part 2. This looks like a dampening system. Something detected that the bell was about to ring too hard, and it grabbed the clapper. It absorbed the vibrational energy and dumped it into space to prevent a catastrophe. This implies two things, neither of which is comforting. Possibility. 1. The Earth has a natural, immune system-like response that we have never seen before, a way of venting excess seismic energy into the magnetosphere. If this is true, our textbooks are useless. Possibility. 2. Someone built a dampener. Someone built a system to keep the Earth stable, a system designed to suppress the noise from the deep mantle. And on November 14th, that system struggled to keep up. The silence lasted 12 minutes. But the Atacama pulse only lasted for 12.6 seconds. 3 pulses. Why did the silence stay on for so long? Because the dampener was cooling down, or rebooting, or holding the line until it was sure the danger had passed. This leads us to the most disturbing piece of data I have found so far. It's not from a seismograph, it's from a satellite, the Gray CFO mission. These are 2 satellites that chase each other around the Earth, measuring gravity. If there is more mass in one spot, like a mountain, the gravity is higher and the satellites move apart. They create a map of the Earth's density. I looked at the gravity anomaly map for the Atacama region for the week of November 14th. Gravity usually changes very slowly. Mountains don't move. Glaciers melt slowly. But in the week following the anomaly, the gravity in that specific sector of the Andes dropped. Mass disappeared. Millions of tons of mass. If you have a cave-in, density goes up, rock gets more compact. For density to go down, matter has to leave, or expand. The thing in the mantle, the source of the 16 Hertz signal, didn't just vibrate, it moved. It shifted upwards. And as it moved, the silence on the surface broke. We are no longer looking at a static anomaly. We are looking at an event that is in motion. The silence was a pause breath, a warning shot. And the reason I know it's not over? Because yesterday, I received an email from a listener who works in network maintenance for underwater fiber optic cables. He didn't want to go on record, but he told me to look at the logs for the transatlantic cables on the same day. They didn't break, they didn't snap. But for 12 minutes, the data throughput slowed down, not because of a computer error, but because the cables themselves physically stretched. The Earth didn't just go silent, it expanded. If you want to know the truth about the Earth changing, don't ask a geologist. Ask a high-frequency stock trader. Geologists work in millions of years. Traders work in nanoseconds. In the world of algorithmic trading, the speed of light is the limit. A signal traveling from New York to London takes a specific amount of time, determined by the length of the fiber optic cable under the Atlantic Ocean. That time is constant. It is physics. But on November 14th, at 4 hours 15 minutes UTC, the traders in London noticed a lag. It was tiny, just a few microseconds. To you and me, that's nothing. To an algorithm that makes 1,000 trades a second, it's a catastrophe. They assumed the router was broken. They assumed a server had hiccuped. But the tip I received from the network engineer tells a different story. He pulled the optical time domain reflectometer, OTDR logs. This is a tool that shoots a laser down the cable to measure its length and health. The logs showed that the cable didn't break. It didn't degrade. It got longer. For 12 minutes, the distance between New York and London increased by approximately 14 feet. 14 feet. You cannot stretch a glass fiber cable by 14 feet without snapping it, unless the ground it was buried in stretched with it. Unless the ocean floor expanded. This confirms the gravity data from part 3. The Earth didn't just vibrate, it inflated. Imagine a balloon. When you blow into it, the surface stretches. The distance between 2 points on the balloon gets larger. For 12 minutes, something inside the Earth pushed out. And this explains the global silence. If the Earth was expanding, the crust was under immense tension. When you pull a guitar string tight, it stops vibrating at its loose, natural frequency. It goes rigid. The silence wasn't a dampener. It was a side effect of the planet taking a deep breath. But rocks don't breathe. And the transition zone, where that 16 Hertz signal originated, doesn't expand on its own, unless it was pressurized. This leads us to the most dangerous theory of all, one that has circulated in the fringes of academic geology for years but has never had proof, until now. The theory of the deep biosphere gas release. We know there are massive reservoirs of water and gas trapped in the mantle minerals. Ringwoodite, the rock I mentioned earlier, acts like a sponge. It holds water. If the temperature at 600 kilometers depth were to spike even by a few degrees, that rock would dehydrate. It would release its water as superheated steam instantly. That steam would expand with the force of 1 billion hydrogen bombs. The 16 Hertz signal? That wasn't a machine. That was the sound of a phase change. The sound of millions of tons of rock boiling and releasing gas all at once. And the expansion? That was the pressure wave trying to crack the planet open. But it didn't crack. Because something stopped it. We established in part 2 that the energy from the crust was siphoned off into the magnetic field. We thought someone was harvesting the Earth. But looking at the expansion data, I realized I had it backward. They weren't harvesting energy. They were dumping it. They were grounding the planet. Think about an electrical circuit. If you have a power surge, you send it into the ground to save the device. But what if the ground is the thing surging? You have to send the energy up. I started looking for man-made systems capable of handling that kind of electromagnetic load. The project's Sanguine antenna is gone. HAARP is too weak. But there is one machine that spans the entire globe. One machine that is connected to the ground at millions of points. The global electrical power grid. High-voltage transformers are grounded deep into the Earth. They interact with geomagnetically induced currents, GIC, all the time. Usually, GICs are bad. They blow up transformers during solar storms. But on November 14th, something impossible happened to the grid. I pulled the load data from ENSOE, the European Transmission Network, and PJM interconnection in the USA. At 4 hours 15 minutes UTC, power demand didn't change. But reactive power, MVAR, spiked simultaneously across both continents. Reactive power is the energy that sloshes back and forth in a system without doing work. It's usually a nuisance. But you can use it to create magnetic fields. The data suggests that at the exact moment the Earth started to expand, thousands of transformers across the northern hemisphere were pushed into saturation simultaneously. They didn't trip. They didn't fail. They were driven. Someone or something commandeered the global power grid. They used the transformers to suck electromagnetic energy out of the ground, converting the mechanical stress of the expansion into magnetic flux and blasted it into the atmosphere. That's why the magnetic stations spiked. It wasn't the Earth acting as a transducer naturally. It was the grid acting as a transducer artificially. This saved us. If that energy had stayed in the crust, the expansion would have cracked the tectonic plates. We would have seen magnitude 10 earthquakes. Instead, the grid took the hit. The cables stretched, the silence fell, and the pressure was vented. But who has the keys to the entire global grid? No single nation controls it. The US grid is separate from Europe. Europe is separate from Russia. There is no master switch. Unless the control wasn't human. We rely on smart grids now. AI-driven load balancing. Systems that talk to each other in milliseconds to prevent blackouts? Is it possible that these decentralized systems detected the surge from the ground and reacted instinctively? A swarm intelligence protecting its own infrastructure? Or is there a backdoor? A legacy protocol buried in the code of the SCADA systems that run our power plants. A planetary defense protocol, written decades ago, designed to trigger exactly this kind of event in case of a geophysical collapse. I thought this was paranoia. Then I found the timestamp code again. Remember the binary string in the Brazilian magnetic logs? 0001. I went back to it. I realized I was reading it wrong. It wasn't just a carrier signal. It was a status report. It matches the packet structure of an obscure protocol called IEC 61850. It's the language used by electrical substations to talk to each other. The binary translates to a command code, goose trip block. It's a command to override safety fuses, to force the system to hold the line even if it's overheating. But buried in the payload section of that packet, there was a variable. In the November 14th event, the variable was set to n equals 3. I looked back at the 2023 events. The variable was n equals 4. I looked at the 2021 events. The variable was n equals 5. It's a countdown. The system isn't just reacting, it is executing a sequence. And here is the terrifying part. The 16 Hertz signal from the Mantle, the ghost frequency, pulsed exactly 3 times during the last event. N equals to 3. 3 pulses. The system knows what is coming from the deep. It is counting the heartbeats of the anomaly. And if the pattern holds, the next event will be n equals 2, and the pulses will be stronger. The expansion was 14 feet this time. The grid barely held it together. If the next expansion is 20 feet or 50, the transformers won't saturate, they will explode. And when the grid dies, the shield dies. The silence will break. And the sound that follows, the sound of the earth finally screaming, will be the last thing anyone hears. But there is one final piece of the puzzle. The location of the n equals to 3 command. It didn't originate from the control centers in New York or London. The IP header on the packet traces back to a location that doesn't have a power plant. It doesn't have a city. It doesn't even have a zip code. It traces back to a coordinate in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Point Nemo, the spacecraft cemetery. The place furthest from any landmass on Earth. There is nothing there but water. Unless the control center isn't on the water, it's under it. Point Nemo. Coordinate 48 degrees, 52.6 minutes. South latitude and 123 degrees, 23.6 minutes west longitude. If you sail there, you are 1,670 miles from the nearest land. If you look up, the closest humans to you are the astronauts on the International Space Station. It is the most isolated place on our planet. We use it as a dumping ground. When a satellite dies, when a space station is decommissioned, we crash it into Point Nemo. The ocean floor there is a graveyard of titanium and burnt circuits, resting in eternal darkness. So when the IP address of the Goose Trip Lock command, the command that hijacked the global power grid to save the Earth, traced back to this location, I assumed it was a glitch, or perhaps a hacked satellite that had survived re-entry. But I dug deeper into the routing tables. This signal didn't come from the surface. It came from a deep ocean assessment and reporting of tsunamis, buoy. Buoy ID 51407. Officially, buoy 51407 was decommissioned in 2018. It went dark. It stopped sending wave height data. But on November 14, buoy 51407 woke up. It didn't send wave data. It acted as a relay. It was bridging a connection between the global internet satellite constellation, Starlink, and something sitting on the seafloor, 4 kilometers beneath the waves. I reached out to a contact in oceanographic mapping. I asked for the bathymetry data of Point Nemo. Usually, the ocean floor is mapped at low resolution. It looks like a smooth blue sheet. But in 2017, a private survey vessel mapped this specific sector in high definition looking for seabed minerals. They found an anomaly. At the exact coordinates of the signal, there is a structure. Geologists call it a carbonate mound. It's a hill on the sea floor. But nature creates mounds that are irregular. This mound is a perfect hexagon. It is 3 miles wide. It is capped with a material that reflects sonar differently than the surrounding basalt. And right in the center of it, there is a thermal vent. But it's not venting magma. It's venting heat. Pure, radiated heat. This is the control center. This is the black box of the Earth. The theory falls into place. The silent zone isn't an attack. It isn't a glitch. It is an automated immune response, triggered by a system that has been sitting at the bottom of the world for God knows how long. When the transition zone in the mantle overheats, when that 16 Hertz signal starts to pulse, this facility at Point Nemo activates. It sends the command code. It overrides the power grids of the human civilization above. It uses our own infrastructure to vent the planet's excess energy into space. It creates the silence to stop the Earth from shaking itself apart. We are not the masters of this planet. We are the fuse box, and the fuse is burning out. We need to talk about the countdown. N equals to 5 in 2021. N equals to 4 in 2023. N equals to 3 on November 14th. The intervals are getting shorter. Between N equals to 5 and N equals to 4, there were 2 years. Between N equals to 4 and N equals to 3, there was only 1 year. If the pattern holds, N equals to 2 will happen in 6 months. N equals to 1 will happen 3 months after that. And then N equals to 0. What happens at 0? I spoke to a systems theorist about this. He explained that in automated safety systems, a countdown usually indicates retry attempts. The system tries to stabilize the anomaly. It fails. It waits. It tries again, harder. N equals 3 means the system has tried to dampen the deep Earth expansion 3 times, and it hasn't stopped it. The 16 Hertz signal is getting louder. The gravity is dropping faster. The fiber optic cables are stretching further. The thing in the mantle is still rising. The expansion we measured, those 14 feet of stretching in the Atlantic, was just the beginning. If the dampener fails, if the Sentinel at Point Nemo runs out of attempts, the next expansion won't be measured in feet. It will be measured in miles. The crust will not stretch. It will tear. We are looking at a crustal displacement event. The last time something like this theoretically happened, we have records of it in every ancient culture. The Great Flood, the sinking of Atlantis, the days of darkness. Maybe those weren't myths. Maybe they were the last time the counter hit 0. We built our civilization during a quiet period, a lull in the cycle. We built our cities on the fault lines. We laid our cables across the expansion zones. We assumed the Earth was a solid, static rock. But the data from the silent zone proves us wrong. The Earth is a dynamic, resonant engine, and that engine is revving up. So, what do we do? The experts are silent. The USGS isn't publishing the 16 Hertz data. The Navy isn't talking about the carrier wave in the magnetic field. They are hoping it goes away. But you and I know it won't. Because if you listen closely, the silence is already coming back. Yesterday, I checked the live feed from the GSN station in Antarctica. For 3 seconds, the microseism dropped. Not to 0, but it dipped. It was a flicker. A test fire. The Sentinel is waking up for N equals to 2. I want you to do something for me. Don't take my word for this. The data is public. Go to the IRIS database. Look at the 0.2 Hertz band. Go to the INTM magnet archives. Look for the spikes in the South Atlantic. Go to the ENSO-E power load maps. Watch for the saturation events. Monitor the silence. Because the next time the world goes quiet, it might not be for 12 minutes. It might be forever. The frequency is disappearing. The ghost is singing. And the countdown is ticking. The Earth is holding its breath. And soon, it's going to scream. This has been an investigation into the global silent zone. If you found value in this deep dive, if you want to help us track the anomalies, share this video. The more eyes we have on the raw data, the harder it is for them to hide the pattern. I'm the Ancient Enigma, and until next time, keep listening. Because the silence is the loudest sound there is.